China, Iran are the number one concern survey for experts in the coming years. Korea leaps attention to nuclear tests and missile tests. The magnitude likely in North is a catastrophic threat that's greater than years ago. It's not clear the Cambridge Travel Chairman tests will continue. North strength its forces expect returning nuclear missile tests. North undeniable security threat must be managed by catastrophic results. Biden will need early actions to reassure North is willing to engage in risk of its forceful propagation. Specifically, the MDT causes small skirmishes to escalate down 1 to 15. Most likely route to wars. Various skirmishes in North and South quickly escalates MDT. But the U.S. has been obligated to aid to protect the Pacific area active. With the combination of conflicts, power provocations, but not only happen. The LC first killing civilians and soldiers. The lack of sympathy to hit. North President was like, okay, this is a USFK commander talking about environment today since local threats might prevail and goes nuclear and escalates. Hamilton 21 terrorism turns increase the chances of catastrophic nuclear conflagration, increasing the short range missiles as first strike and increasing adversary motivations to strike weapons. It be prone on others communications within the short field. Turns to escalate harder than poor communication. There will be more misinterpretation issues in communication language rapidly supporting reaction time nuclear wars. Since the number of occasions reacted in China, the early one is having problems with the difficulty distinguishing false reliance from actual attacks for launching short reaction times and fate at the mercy of detection or cyber attacks on sufficient time to make this evident in China North. Another new source of accidental nuclear from the North Union U.S. missiles through capable to launch their soon to be nuclear counterattack any possibility of the never into wars and cyber attacks. There's escalation from conventional conflict using nuclear weapons. Given the high risen genocide and conflicts across the earth, given nuclear attacks, COVID, increased resilience and nuclear weapons pandemic reveals vulnerability to conventional force pandemics, particularly conventional on Korea and extinction from North EMP, popping 17 EMP for army attacks. North is currently the vast majority of the U.S. infrastructure technical paths from future obstacles to have their lightweight EMP devices have higher impact, easier to deliver through yields. The technical developments are easy to manage. The U.S. dependent on the grids to health, communication, water, and highly powerful. All are vulnerable to EMPs. Potential to hold society arrested and give multiple forces is not an extra threat. In yellow, sea entrapment independently goes nuclear drought. 18th, given provocations given to the LCD. Constraints that prefer provocations for nuclear wars, not strong accident risk perception, miscalculation for the conflict that is net and no real provocations and incited nuclear war through nuclear probability pretending to become overcome when your soul is more confident the risk park is in the military political consideration souls is strike back disproportionately and China and the allies get drawn and escalate also in the 17 war in Korea. What about China and North? US is relations to Iran and after China to push the US out for China American actions dealing with North continuing to nuclear indistinguishable from time and US allies have deep interest at stake multiple so that the number of third parties can pull the United States and China into war. Obviously China to rebuild the military so many conflicts multiple party obviously a risk that resistance increase exponentially and opcon transfers unique risk coordination failures go nuclear Kim 18 3-stage models appropriate RK can give self-defense that the public center has been growing officially the moon parallel structure can create sufficient time to develop capability to influence it through first and second stages of alliance with continued no threat to have conventional WMD nuclear missiles preventing the security vacuum of opcon transfers critical to the alliance create gradual preventing Kim's miscalculation by short by the alliance of showing US RK has a sufficient time to develop their capabilities at 3-stage model RK try to KMD and KMPR did the North WMD this make more than 10 years RK's willing in the US is official the 3-stage model to delete security vacuumations for the U.S. after the operations there's gradual change law for corrections and the difference in minimize mistakes military staff and ready to drastically change the plans pre-coordination transfer sustains unity of command Kim 18 the first 2 stages of the integrated command and the CTF operating under single command or unit command enables leaders to understand effectively how to have unity of efforts which is essential for the U.S. and Japan will mitigate the parallel structure achieving unity by aiming unified action and coordinating organization sense of a parallel structure and the stage establishes ACM to effectively ACM military the with most established currently organizing existing organizations and each near miss makes the next crisis worse. COVID collapses and unique nuclear risk allied appraisal solves 120. Washington will must dramatically increase its allocation. Otherwise, the U.S. and North Korea continue plowing endlessly avail each higher risk from each failure. Strategically into his realistic estimates of possibilities and goals of pandemic worsens against the region collapse of fire players adequately keep it non-nuclear. This would have that most coordination strategic focus on stretch of the Washington improved policy before it's too late. This illustrates how the fragile status quo is in negotiation umbrella currency strategies necessary. The plan puts fire breaks and escalation by requiring updated consultation. Manzo 15 minutes of escalation with Duncan's priority. The agreed upon counter provocation plan questions from challenges remain archive forces might conclude the reporting is involved with this fair game responsible. Closing in large retaliatory operations received disproportionate and agreed to counter-provocation plan that aligns broader strategy compete with short chance of potentially military is ongoing challenges of line of demarcation options considered in the plan larger military plans how the use of arcade console of the crisis perceptions of the threshold and risk stakes have offer officials to have to coordinate in complex scenarios that escalate quickly strategy for escalation management and making capital structures escalate capability preemptive strike into equate when equal quality difference between initiate unilateral decision with the US and South cross purposes disagreements allow about fundamental goals but the team to the alliance and it calibrates credible deterrence which solves North provocation business testing cyber attacks Kim 19 TM expose the great leaking pressure the South Korea propping the U.S. trigger points launching propagations. Pablo, the threshold retaliation, Chief Pyongyang schools must have Red missile launches, cyber attacks, and companies that latest after the new development for Washington and Seoul neither wishes to overact like research wants for Pyongyang's perception of the gray zone dialing down provocations allows for to set up in the long term considering the gray zone challenge of the clear framework for managing conventional cyber war capabilities, escalation and deterrence. Any strategy must essentially involve the deal with ambiguity actions, especially influencing North Korean decisions requires U.S. and South to establish clearly a delineated structure of disincentives of credible retaliatory threats without deterring dangerous conflicts. While neither deterrence or nor escalation management is enough, particularly important in North Korea advancing offensive capabilities, stealing $32 million. Also, as operational plans, sensitive military documents, response to little grade response to military measures, diplomatic information, and economic leverage tools, sanction maritime posture, and current was sold the fire and fuse to turn the blind eye. Once the regime demands a carefully tactical, flexible approach in North Korea attacks floating power plants that triggers massive radiological risk. More 20 Pyongyang years over the cybercrime of the paid for something to lose Kim, attracted a world-class cyber army, expect North to charge political infrastructure in the FMPPs, vital energy technology from many of the region FMPs connected, descended remote populations, energy grid will share, cybersecurity vulnerability, security remains insufficient. The North hackers compromise advanced computer systems, attacking critical infrastructure, including nuclear facilities, and attacking disaster consequences, radiological releases in the media environment of global importance, triggers extinction, Karki 18, the priorities and most important resources within ecological environment, supports life on Earth, the IPS of greens, ecosystem provides sustainable development, reaches deeply connected, the has vast landscapes and a high number of unique ecosystems, global biodiversity, has to make a diverse country, the massive global diversity globally, and plan the United States federal government should exclude North Korean attacks for which there is no mutually agreed upon proportional response from conditions that activate the United States federal government's defense back with South Korea. Advantage 2 is South will deploy UVs, thus disrupting the entire allied framework, cause boundary conflict and undersea war, but are too overloaded to solve. Yun 20 Arcane is deploying UVs operating with the framework of the alliance by having CF created the relies on the which fundamental arcane defense, arcane submarines warfare, and adventure US UVs radically support them or whatever, leading to unplanned encounters in the underwater conflict that affect allies Japan and the United States. The speed at which using the North Korean submarine SFP and so the strike weapons putting all together may produce a vessel that cheats management capabilities go to AI. We can build and undersea war goes nuclear. Clark 16 stability depends on predictability of defense attacks and aversion challenges to undersea warfare threat and the relative stability, including submarine cables, the lessons surveillance and CNC, the risk to second check nuclear stabilities, the to reduce stability, nuclear powers must improve their ability to monitor control waters off the shores, and South defense is reeling. Yo 20 COVID is it's hard to the South is dependent more on locally preventing the critical effects drive products and innovation clusters support regional cooperation, defensive R&D and manufacturing, comms, spin-off, self drones, Handy 21 defense technology, but everyday life and drone communications, both defense and private sector KI, civilian airspace tech forces and technology supporting unmanned trams use the military to take ground, reboost the competitiveness and defense simultaneously spin off approach to the real world effects of private sector effect. More solves algae blooms to 80-20 outside range for the algae by 90% of the world's economy grow drones to respond much more quickly. Previous efforts existing processes come some required visits the difficult to before the bloom spread. Extinction must 21 as algae nutrients come out of the oxygen making unlivable for humans. Oxygen is as food chains human depend on humans cannot live with the super algae. We need fish to survive the oxygen redistribution from places using the human survival into the bloom scrape and algae groups in the ocean. Animals can't function. There'll be frames the result of tropical as big human and planet and habitable plants solves South USA UAV ISRs lagging. Joe 20 South autonomous ISRs in the low end systems that limited detection plans require advanced ISR UAVs perform very rapidly. South announced that the military satellites programs continues to list the limited detection range solves that because alliance reliance traps armament and short-term conventional complacency ends the alliance. Joe 20 alliance reliance forcing the South to pass the limitations needed autonomous to averting armament priorities and short-term converting digital capabilities asymmetric division. The RK will deepen another 5 years of complacent armaments without paradigm shift shall likely to continue to be set from threats from North trouble position. The United States increasing technism home from foundation lines, including U.S. presence in the plan. Let the U.S. and South talk through disagreement. They increase commitment. Hoffman 15 disagrees and strengthen alliance relations with South and Washington problems. The northern political contestation limit the early 2000s. How the South decisions should have troops in the Arctic assumptions how North's contestation security since maintains disagreements. Tokyo has considered few normal leaders that lead to centrality alliance effort. Despite diverging their perception at the low point of relations, either Washington or Seoul is committed to dimensional alliance. North Korea said that the central the extension of regional security being talks on the more mature partnership disagreement surface on the for security concerns to define the acceptable programs of disagreement, redesigning formal commitments is the best way to limit and trap and nudge North to do more and judge Korea to do more. Kim 11 states that design alliances the case studies of Korea demonstrate allows Kim redesigning to avoid trap the effective safeguard clauses heard of they are quite effective safe system to search and effort to negotiate if conditions not matter their weak on the reliance reliability with its advantage. The U.S. must become modifying alliance commitments withdrawing altogether. We must guide these assumptions of influence on the alliance and deterrence against enemies. Only the plan solves pending alliance collapse from cohesion collapse and uncredible commitments. Bush 17 the world will be sounded dangerous plus windows. North is able to continue USD real danger stems we can alliance South Korea security the commitments the USA will mean to defend them from North Korea's skepticism sold by the community credibility is increasing accuracy the level of the lower legislation legend back off once being hit the rate that there's bigger list and the issue needs false interest no young reason to think that US lost confidence in the ally. Mark at ally.
Cross-X?
Yep.
Okay. What are situations that the US and Korea have not agreed upon the responses to now?
Yeah, so our evidence, the Kim evidence indicates that there's a variety of different hybrid threats that have yet to be agreed upon, like cyber attacks and a variety of responses to even small-scale skirmishes. Both South Korea and the US have a different interpretation of how to respond to small armed attacks in the status quo, like taking of an island or crossing or missile tests or other things like that. There's a variety of different interpretations from both countries of how we should respond, which can cause conflict. the Yellow Sea
Does the
incident that is
plan
critically
initiate
linked.
consultation?
The plan the result of the plan would initiate consultation, but it's not a fiated mandate of it.
Right, right.
Which our Manzo evidence says that it would result in that.
Okay, what situations cannot activate the defense pact post-plan?
Yeah, I mean, just the plan text, situations that we have yet to agree upon a response together on what the threshold for response would be and how we respond together.
Okay, but like if the United States and Korea agree to that situation in the future, then the defense pact applies to that again, right?
If there's an agreement, then yes, there would have to be a consultation before the MDT is triggered, and so that would probably result in some sort of consultations after, and then we'd have to come to agreement. If there's no agreement, then the MDT won't be triggered, or if South Korea does something without consulting the U.S., then the MDT won't be triggered, and we're not forced to be entrapped in a conflict.
Okay, which conflicts does this solve? Like, why would this stop Yellow Sea entrapment, for example?
Yeah, because South Korea right now has a different interpretation of what what the escalation measures should be. They have a disproportionate retaliation posture, which our evidence says that will cause the U.S. to be entrapped in a conflict. The Molman evidence says that they want to respond to small skirmishes by escalating more than the U.S. would want to have happen. So that solves that, but it also solves U.S. escalation as well, and it solves low-level attacks because we right now have an underreaction posture, which is a problem. So we also solve kind of deterrence writ large, which is the Kim evidence.
Okay, and so does everyone around the world realize that the defense pact can't be activated unless Korea and the U.S. agree?
I don't know. Our AF doesn't take a stance on that in the 1AC, but we would say that it'd probably happen through like potentially military negotiations or something like that, which can kind of reduce the chances of everyone around the world knowing, but that's something we can get into later.
Okay. What happens if Korea never wants to activate the defense pact at all?
I'm not sure what that like if Korea doesn't ever want to activate the defense pact, then it probably wouldn't ever activate the defense pact, but that's the status quo. That's how it would happen right now.
Okay, we're gonna take prep starting now. Stopped at 8 exactly. I'll send the one and see. Okay, sorry, I sent it to the wrong, or I saved it in the wrong folder, but then found it. Anyway, it's sent now. Actually, start prep. Okay, stop. I just realized there was a text error. So okay. Use the second doc.
The order is the same though, so it's 8 and then advantage 1, advantage 2. Okay, is anyone not ready?
Yeah, one
Okay.
sec. Sorry, let me pull up the most recent version.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got it. I'm gonna go.
Okay, I'll start. Consult response counter the United States argument to engage in power funding consultation with the Republic of Korea over what actions it deems necessary to meet the insurance defense pact because activated by North Korea induced South Korea did not develop deploy UUVs and fund autonomous deterrence from South Korea with all funds and resources necessary to develop autonomous deterrence against North Korea induced South Korea to allow the three-stage model aligned with the one came out of this consultation holds while permitting nuclear hedging power 15 and prices may respond to the consultation with the LA features of the consultation for something nuclear I think it's different to the purpose of the implementation of the instrument consultation allies if they said that it's to consider the business understanding of the consultation system is uncertainty that this conversation for the ambiguity remains for the reasons of the credibility guarantees of the incentive trust the constitution how the alliance to superior security guarantees are long-lasting and flexible economy the assurance is bleeding next off prolific defense commitments for nuclear prolific operates and back your the country departments and not credible the alliances eligible for your credibility social rather ancestry matters let's support how to make the horse further not actually will believe if a country it sees a lack of result of this rational credibility allies and research allies will find their broad under circumstances of great risk requiring more than capability for us protecting such as the which realizing guarantees to allies when they proliferate arguments the crucial research guarantees only if allies feel that they useful honor commitments the nuke war and terror proximal for 60 more nukes are the states higher the results even so turn to nuclear warning will find any official panic the shares messages they missiles will find the prolific nakers and nuclear vessel wall that proliferate allies states have trust allies and see the feel that quasi-doomsday posture the lock and escalation states build dangerous vulnerable hostages because they lack the money capacity position of nukes without deterrence has new states when down like the rational preempts before many nuclears may not persist security may be not be risk of risk the legal should not see actors next off dip cut the United States federal government ease sanctions in violation of the joint comprehensive plan of action of the Islamic Republic of Iran that resource negotiations for the JCPOA ABG 14. Biden tried to look at and calibrate the Turks have the U.S. to make the justice system relief justice the humanitarian relief they've had the fault lines to the U.S. hardliners to the abandonment for the Rouhani to engage the United States out of the colonies to secure that affairs needs the U.S. consider the racist kids to compliance this positively they let's talk to you some more the deal is working the channel limits to start bills your arrangement they centrifuge of the instant access to the sites of pressure failed alternative defense measure requires offsetting tip cap Anderson et al 13 the allies across the assurance and balancing allied demands to find it resources particularly to cause the solution requires the disciplinary offense of that the allied firms of resistance to any change to apply the alteration to resolve the allies or whether the opponents to target the capital any change regardless of how the defeated leads to allies of course they status is surprised by a shift that allies resist the cascade for the forces of trade-offs Anderson when the foreign policy is by the issue raised for the less than focus on other issues putting the conflicts the country watch for the more issues to trust resources because diplomatic currencies finding critical that the U.S. focus on efforts investing dipcat now is key to peace after through to the U.S. officials like the nuke seal but soon they runs the expansion and missiles rain in Iraq the issue of the arms of the U.S. facility in the Middle East intention of the U.S. is fighting over the endless engagement to invest in tiny diplomatic resources now extension every 20 year escalation world with the major war a minor war escalation Middle East Pakistan Russia China allies will be drawn into the nukes will be used to intentionally escalate by advanced that destroying civilization would be rise the blockade hydrological social ocean act would be destroying next off Biden's infrastructure deal depends on PC. McNamara 316. They wouldn't need any of your Republicans. They reconsidered bodies and argued if they had a Senate working all 50 Dems, so they seem lines of intricate evidence. Moderate like management and cinema. A balance of the mercy planning with a message about the tax and funds the infrastructure management. How would have to be bigger than stimulants, limiting alliances, prompts fire, backlash, and authority, bureaucracy, representative, other branches, and the opposite jobs to intervene over institutions, levels of liberty, promote the fire, backlash, role they applicate the joints to the Dems, Republicans, and Congress, to raise shooting, engage Congress, and alliances of tax solutions. The interest of the radical case of neighborhood rights and totally bureaucracy and finding key to prevent infrastructure damage to PG. 3 for the infrastructure and upkeep the infrastructure for crisis now is essential for the crisis. The U.S. seems to hover over this disaster test is the only reason that Congress should lead into reversing the attribution where the American society says Shifting States extinction, Korea 19 events, the laser crippled the grid, critical infrastructure social rapid contest by results of team time, cyber testing could have 90% of the population starvation, disease collapse, the cyber threats, and network sophistication. Next up, trilateralism, Japan relations are throwing under Biden lead 321 circle, means back to the military opposition, security against North Korea, and once the country over the U.S. Businesses Tokyo and Seoul appears to be partial relations. The only secret to hold military talks and call it any action viewed as favoring one LA over another, even tangentially breaks our alliances inside Soko, Japan competition, Park 11, mutual versus remain the target company means influence of the U.S. every the deals with Japan is so clear. Korea risk being in risk to be by either side. They are supposed to be Japan persistent Korea. They argue relations with the U.S. Koreans. Exactly the Japan's influence of the U.S. have used Japan's main region over hating emergency police Korean infrastructure. International American action Japan to security as Korea, except for the increased ability to commit the threat competition for Korea influence Japan's of their relationship with the U.S. There's security competition within Japan and so could be found. And the competition Korea is where the Japan and the U.S. security office workers more and so could be for causes trilateral breakdowns. It's over with 321 military average return every single over the public security over there of the harbor of trilateral coordination versus a unique trilateral relations. One weak link could invite the relations either both to the U.S. and Japan or Korea, except the U.S. and everything West Side Alicia backlash of claims to versus some global war about a 20 that lingering animosities have the make combat needs to weakening of the cooperative have severe ratification of the crisis of the limited relationship U.S. Our Korea ratings for public the United States Japanese contributions to Japan's military response for the U.S. Our responses to what is events of Japan that trilateral cooperative about to force multiple intercourse in the U.S. and to prevent catastrophic conflict. Next off, Harris counterpart the United States federal government should declare preserving activations by North Korean attacks for which there is no mutually agreed about. Her personal response for the conditions indicates an inability to discharge the power and duties of the presidential office that 46% of the United States should maintain its alliance commitments. The counterpart uses the 25th Amendment to oust Biden of Harris following the plan. Because the 25th Amendment authorizes the vice president of the cabinet to declare a president unable to discharge the powers and duties for the office of vice president. We use to become the experts in Congress. We do not have to do anything with the running of the call. Experts of the previous term invoking 25th is a plausible meeting could be short. She'll also decriminalize leaves weed. Carry 21 uses with highlights from Visa Biden, who, when the drugs are of Harris, as emphasis that Harris wants the marijuana and Biden favors keeping the marijuana illegally national, solves global cartel violence, including Mexico. Smith, 20 things with the American pressures they plan is the prohibition symbols and consequences in Mexico, Philippines, Russia, Southeast Asia, everywhere the drug abuse benefits only traffickers go declare. LCC say there's no reason for the U.S. to protect the security of the conditions resistance could bring on the U.S. security resistance away from foreign company cartels and Mexico, the violence, corrupting institutions, undermining governance, Louisiana, criminal actions, trying to rush to the conflict where and with the military in Latin America, such to conduct military operations by the homeland or first things diversion. Next off, Supreme Court counterpart the United States Supreme Court ought to hold their responses to the plans to activation contravenes the constitutional process of the United States. Counterpart also unravels the PQG towards 12 the PQG which they proposed left to the political for the judicial the courts running constitution by the middle and the outer branches these are the foreign relations of the slippery slope within each scenario here's given considerations. PQG erodes global norms and turn warfare. Counterpart 17 the court dismisses to change the legality of the cases ISIS crimes of the PQG the held to non-justifiable and the political question ruling of the follow of their party by plenty of everything everything the claim where they have the standing test include the individual hammer of the U.S. jurisdictions of course very important to the less exceed powers even the most important the interpretation of the authorization for the jurisdictions have the political question extinction boil 13 that according to the UAV type that arms underway that stability for the research for example the deterrence surveillance low cost is desirable the journals have the relations with the powers matter for the risk of all of the accidents that throw out of to conversation norms of whatever their punch the decision towards the jungle China Russia there Israel may use in terms that a more sensible approach would be limited with the international tendencies that are regulate the U.S.'s opportunities for leadership. Next off,
hey Kelly, can you skip the next off? Read the right Supreme Court text and then go to case. I put it in the Zoom chat.
Yeah, changing the text. The United States Supreme Court ought to hold the responses to the activation of mutual defense pact with Korea without the consultation with Korea first contravenes the constitutional process of the United States. Advantage 1, no North Korea war post 21 vulnerability of their allies and access to missiles and artillery to the aggressive U.S. is to the agreement to the LSD that claim refrain from military action wherever the U.S. capabilities vulnerability necessitates constant recent Korean missiles and made the mainland more vulnerable than the U.S. recent to overcome missile defense, denying the Korean gains from limited attack the capabilities of the Korean anti-conflict signal. No Yellow Sea war, Heinz 16 the most dispatches to deal with the Chinese vessels. The Yellow Sea never the first instance, official was killed, enhanced demarcations, education, and so on. Likelihood of this as a serious risk of challenges such as general suffering, to loyalty, high levels of trade suggest that neither isolation permanently damaged ties, no biodieclause, hands on anyone. 18. What is fascinating? The great dynamics to survive all life is adaptable. That is to be through everything. The Triassic shows resilience being used to the existence of tipping point already in which Earth will collapse. There's no evidence even locally that planets do not collapse in the Triassic that will not collapse in the damage regards to the ecologists, the ecosystems will degree never fall out. Seasonal experiments never should collapse. No impact to EMPs called in that fear for figures two simple facts to generate enough species hardly enough a country that's dealing with the EMPs fighting the nuclear war. When you talk through this generation, do not press the logic that an EMP without the nuclear is the expensive part and not worth it after the findings of damage to the street swallow would take countless tests and when it's done. So the advantage to drones are useless orbits. Skip that. No sub-bombing impacts. CACEA3 a crash can end all life is exaggerated reactors or such without the accidents and ever been launched on anything to condition testers launched SLBMs. Submarines the launch in order to permit the coast with target info from the ground. Instead of Russian submarines cannot launch in missiles in such an order. Russians and CNC do not situate the near control nuclear missiles when they want to manage to launch these intelligence because of lack of ability to fly them into no suggesting collisions to make 16 no dead since impact Georgie and all 16 is 15. It is some situations that all algae blooms are probably only human activities that connected with the other percent eutrophication is more into this HEV occurring the association with the nutrient limitation complex remains and those cannot be clearly associated. Topicality, substantiality excludes substance synonym. One essential limit is when one is versus a broad range of classes. One's inability to perform a single job is not constitutional limitation. Limits around infinite. Minor twisted adversaries, location, conflict categories, or any condition. Only broad limitations guarantee link uniqueness prevent bi-directional clarifications.
Okay, we have 10 minutes. Let's start. Okay, stopped at 9:38.
I'm good.
Okay, so that's each other. Okay, good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, status of the counterplans.
Conditional.
Length. Length's conditional.
Yeah, conditional.
Okay. The first counterplan, the plank of the counterplan, the first plank says ought to engage in prior and binding consultation over what actions it deems necessary to meet the common danger. If its defense pact becomes activated by North Korea, what does it mean to become activated by North Korea?
Well, if it is activated by a North Korean attack.
Okay. Can you specify what this consultation looks like? Does it result in the AF, or if not, what does it result in?
It doesn't result in the AF because it doesn't actually mandate a reduction in our alliance commitment to South Korea at all. It just requires that the US and South Korea coordinate over what they believe potential responses could be. So that means that South Korea could, present their
but
idea.
It doesn't reduce alliance commitments or result in the.
Well, if South Korea comes out and is like, we really want you to reduce to this, then like maybe, but otherwise, it doesn't mandate one. It doesn't fiat one.
The Harris counterplan. The text of the counterplan says declare preserving activations by North Korean attacks for which there is no mutually agreed upon proportional response from conditions. And then the 46 should maintain its alliance commitments. What about the counterplan competes?
So the counterplan doesn't actually say or do the affirmative at all. It doesn't actually make an alteration to our alliance commitment. It just says that not doing the affirmative could qualify as a disqualifying condition to be president.
Okay, so it's just uniqueness for the thing, just like for the Biden thing.
Yeah.
Okay. The courts counterplan, I haven't seen the new text, but why is that competitive?
Well, it is.
What does it compete on?
Based on the
activation.
Yeah, activation too.
Why is that? Wait, why is that?
Because it holds that activation without consulting Korea first is unconstitutional.
So wait, what does that mean?
Wait, yeah, can you specify that? What how is that competitive?
Well,
what is the result of the counterplan?
Because it doesn't fiat that the US prevents the activation, and rather says that it would be unconstitutional if it were to happen.
It's a certainty thing.
So it's competing on certainty.
It's not certainty.
Cool.
It's based on like how do you deny activation? The app just comes out and straight up and says activation cannot be done. The counterplan just says it is unconstitutional and thus cannot be enforced.
Okay, sounds good. The internal link to the Okay, let's just one last question. DibCap DA. So the uniqueness counter plan is that they that's a different uniqueness counter. Never mind. The trilat DA internal link. Why is the AF viewed as favoritism?
Well, because currently Japan does not have the same sort of consultative mechanism with the US. The AF would obviously be read as the US giving special priority to South Korea. Like, it's something that the US has not extended to any other ally ever, which is something that, Japan would perceive as favoritism.
Sounds good. We're going to start prep at 9:38.
What cards did you all read on T? Did you finish the whole T
That's
thing?
the first one.
Cool. I stopped at 7:55. The order is going to be advantage 1, advantage 2, T, the consult counterplan / advantage counterplan, the courts counterplan, the Harris counterplan, assurances DA, trilat DA, politics DA, and then dipcap DA.
I got about half that. Could you do it
Yeah.
again, please?
I'll go over one more time. The advantage 1, advantage 2, T, the advantage counterplan, like the first counterplan thing, courts counterplan, assurances, trilat, politics, and then dipcap. All right. Is anyone not ready? Cool. Impending North provocation to go nuclear from South or U.S. overreactions draw in China, Russia and China uniquely lacking the LC because of perceived historic weakness, domestic pressures drawn in Hamel Green evidence. It's the most likely scenario, which is the top piece of evidence. Defense doesn't assume SOCO escalation and the LC defense about China, not North Korea. Those skirmishes are coming. The miscalc goes nuclear. D doesn't assume misdistributed missiles, poor communication, and COVID forefronting nukes. The Hamel Green evidence. It's more preferred recency. Afghan fracture. Afghan transition incentivizes no-go for a strike, which escalates only the absolute tension of general decision-making cohesion, can deter attacks and successful transitions to Kim evidence, biodiversity, cyber attacks, nuclear substance cause radioactive ocean. A collapse that causes it kills keystone species, triggers their defense assumes current stability. Whatever happens once a broader region goes under, and there's massive nuclear dispersal that goes up the food chain advantage too. Undersea war goes nuclear SOCO development to break second keep stability and incentivize preemption, which outweighs in time frame. The Clark plan is restraining factor analysis by limiting hybrid escalatory moves like UUPs in the process of renegotiating that set the alliance commitment that motivates South Korea to tone down to offensive opposite defensive investment to defensive and prevents South Korea from escalating with another Kim and Jew evidence done. Their defense is about under the sub bumping. That's not the impacts about second striking abilities, drones, impending warming, related algal blooms, as extinction through food chains, collapse, oceanic, and trophic food systems, muscle weapons, defense about military, not algae and investment. Investment solves drones capabilities and devalues bad just as that's all human cause. We solve it either way. The absolute by reigniting South Korean investment only through reducing complacency and small MT shocks will South Korea shift priorities to Irish and German development. Let's show Hoffman and Kim. They conceded this entire advantage T. They didn't finish. There's no violation. We reduce a host of attack scenarios from triggering the MTD and total agreed upon. The topic doesn't say that that's intended to include substantial limits against considerable excluding minors. So counter treat the substantial limits against acceptable. The substantially considerable limit the substantial preclusion minor way and the self advocates functional limits prevent limits explosion generics defense practice links and MTD ensures that negatives around they limit the topic to overlap the topic to 5 apps. They limit limits by making small picks to complete those are worse than the app. Doesn't have topic D has no authors advocating the topic area air after the negative bias and zero elapsed reasonably only vote negative we make the debate possible and competing interpretation crowd substance which links their offensive counterplan. Permutation due to the plane in any combination of the planks and any combination of the sentences of the planks in any combination of the words of the planks inducing to not deploy fails only domestic support for ISR via breaking the retina of the lines can motivate effective domestic ISR. The counter results in budget fights, poor allocation because of support for offensive technology and lack of innovation that only shifted to domestic commercial sharks. The markets that solve that there's Jew evidence and students fail to get small deterrents. They have an escalatory posture now and it's viewed as massively dangerous for national security. Also doesn't solve US plan of strat. There's no explanation of it. Reject counterpoints that complete uncertainty justifies consultant conditions. Counterpoint permutation. The counterpoint limits the response of preceding activation. That's if it results in less total activation for MDT, it does not compete permutation to both the chills link because the plan is a result of gradual response negotiations or it links to the arguments of precedent setters. This also means it fills in for conditions so that no MDT change happens. The counterpoint also in the case once the South goes first historic embarrassment and operational policy incentivizes disproportionate retaliation before U.S. engagement. The U.S. is obligated to come to aid after the counterpoint, which escalates the moment draw events even to negotiate new terms of best pressures motivate early escalation. They won't consult now. The two is counter provocation plans are coming that asymmetric response doesn't solve because the thresholds and conditions for response vary on case by case basis and not predetermined. The counterpoint ensures perceived underreactions that link worse to the GA and escalate regional conflicts. Manage evidence 3 is redesigning formal commitments are key. Their link is about solidity argument. They signal credibility and recalibrate alliances by building adjustments and force structure and political signaling. This CAM evidence is explicitly tied to the regional deterrence force that pulling overlapping genuine and insecure promises collapse credibility formal modifications against cards against 4 incentives to make it the challenges and partnerships to pulling genuine and insecure promises and formal agreements can underwrite the deterrence and lead bargaining fails allies commitment devices and credibility the agreements when agreements are formally documented. There's a risk of complaining alliance with the agreement to the end of detail. What friends take for granted alliances will require formalization. Parties have different interests. Clarify the alliances and post-custom time unless any negotiable vulnerability demonstrating when it's committed must commit to credible 5 is the unknown order to solve the counterpoint must take MDT activation off the table for small provocations. Anything else has the accidents and miscalculations by flying up the escalation ladder against Korea's wishes. The counterpoint is status quo. Current counter provocation plans fail to spill up to the broader alliance structure. Shared concepts or understandings of escalation responses and constitutive mechanisms because they haven't been applied to the mutual defense treaty. This Mandel triggers miscalculation fracture response. We have an Article 2 commitment to consulting, but it doesn't get used. That's the moment of its courts. Targeted growth permutation to the counterpoint where the federal government be the plaintext competition based on tags and warrants and normal means of the 1AC justifies word picks and picks like the external recommendations for authors. That's bad because authors didn't write the cards of the issuing debate certainty competition. It's bad because it justifies delaying consultant the unpredictable is at the end of the treaty and the African happen multiple ways of boasting and the instruments the amended clarifying lines the lines that designs help to eliminate seems the relationships of more practical word negotiations clarifying loan instruments on the alliance treaty include exchange of the notes of the memorandum negotiate documents and informal statements such as the joint statements exist. Asian counterparts are voted they distract from topic to education still have offense no solvency Biden would fight the counterpoint tooth and nail by keeping troops pushing defense troops and pushing burden sharing executive credible international signals left in 20 the leaders with the international politics of the event of democracy's presidency exercise widest influence of decisions acts in public faces the states foreign policy leaders influence during crisis bargaining major foreign policy relationships are unlikely to be successful without support of a primary leader condoms voters strategy and kills advocacy skills the dispo solves and the counterpoint creates foreign policy cancel signals to the BB and 11 judges are less informed about foreign affairs and the legislature courts have no ability to divide labor internally the courts are very slow and highly decentralized courts that are making the run-of-the-mill contract species whether Taiwan's part of China the one more the week out of the weather makes sense of the week the contract species for the relationship that judge gets the answer wrong without the judges that agrees to disagree with the muddy message over the years. It definitely gets ignored by the military, and the closest that their evidence gets to the impact is underground nuclear testing that doesn't cause extinction. The talking to the 16 decades nuclear testing ability to make national Marshall Islands has 60,000 people died from radiation due to cancer, nuclear explosion, containable outcomes can be left devastating by the devastating assurances. Harris counterpoint. Oh, courts. The text they read solves none of the applicants of the South still overreacts us from the other counterpoint Biden. Permanent wealth shield linked to net benefit because Biden maintains commitments to the process. The AF could be done because the rest of the legislature should have done it differently. They have distinct actions. The counterpart doesn't textually include the whole AF. Means that they don't compete textually voter because it can justify competition advocates across other permutations from the other counterpoints. Biden will probably solve the reject process counterpoints. They justify consult delay that are unpredictable and suffer clash and skirt topic education, cartel level, other drugs and codes level used to man this carpenter. 9. The violence in Mexico has risen sharply. Carl Lund has responded by giving the Army lead rule that $5 million without significant flow of drugs equally ineffective have been the prohibitions, the violence, and Mexico's other solutions of winning the free drugs free the most realistic elements of the domination. No decriminalization. Harris hates weed proven by prosecuting California requires congressional approval. And no, it says no. The previous package proves no impact in Mexico, terminal Latin America. In fact, what happened proven by war on drugs now. That's that we instead of rehaling their evidence and no Latin America war escalation. It's Cardias and 11. Latin America has no international peace stability. No country in the region is in possession of nuclear weapons. No has expressed interest in having the Latin American countries do not have the history of the cross-border wars. Mark Carter, where's the assurances? The absence of assurances, one is the continuous impending notice, probing in uncredible degrees and assurances, two South Korean assurance, two is impending Afghan cohesion failure, and new UVs collapse of the structure good, create diplomatic rebalancing, and that sets the stage for a more credible fear link that's a Hoffman evidence alliance is hyperextension undermines global credit. I'm not going to read that actually. The only failing to uphold the crisis causes hurts credit that's stable in 16 and somewhat agree that out of multiple forces would be essential for American credibility. There's credibility will also make the expectation of U.S. intervention and it's substantially the failing of the war and no problem. In fact, the cascade similar in 20. The wrong about the face of the provision for the cascade is proved to be faulty far slower than expected. The weapons are distasteful, constantly lever around labors. The weapons are difficult to undertake consequences for all the haven't been. There's never been any reason to use weapons. Triality. There's no impact. Doesn't say any war link is terrible. We don't. And either defense fact Japan so relations aren't affected by the use of threats in Nikado and August. The conventional explanations based on external perceptions. Japan. The RK security cooperation do not defend the same issues without other common strategy. Credible use is not a factor in the Japan use RK security cooperation. Market card co-op and North Korean cooperation always linked. That's Tongi and 19 major policy reversals. So decided that. Continue temporarily the military intelligence sharing agreements Japan and previously said that the ongoing sense and symbol of the countries through security cooperation in the face of nuclear threat. The ribbon and trade cooperation among the Japanese U.S. is extremely important response to South Korea and zero risk of trial to cooperate because Korea obviously says no to it and case definitely turns trilateralism because it results in better politics. There's an ability I can't speculate about what it solves the world pass or infrastructure won't pass or it's inevitable through reconciliation institution and 323 the rules of the government reconciliation structure infrastructure should be a similar of reconciliation backdoor situation should be a problem in today's political order the time for Obama can make it happen the major role extends to the way the tax and corporation zero risk if they solve the infrastructure to million that no program can stop the flood the infrastructure can afford the cycle life cost is every year too big the congressional monetary funds the reason for the funding will close gap for every $10 trying to construct this fund maintenance support grants the construction will only raise the water status solves no hype this all hype this sergeant and 18 of the method of infrastructure is currently miscalculation just declined by more than half the major airports with the people ever the seaports are continuing the world's largest countries to trade and there's no good impact that's a lot in 20 not everyone thinks about Biden's approach this smart this is the plans repackaging the bad ideas that failed in the path of electrification the transportation the huge logistical nightmare transportation special much energy electrical power systems to meet Biden's goal the green goals so they have to double the amount of electrical grid generation capacity market capacity the dip cap DA permanent growth that shields the link because if you had to focus on the stimulus bill and other extras trade off and links time to link the different people working on it no impact uniqueness no deal for users trigger no deal it's just and 27 the Biden is because the US will not lift the say how much to get China back to the negotiation table Biden is just the iron levels creating contest will market credit will dip cap as the idea is a link is a fake there's no reason that there's a trade-off there's nowhere in the world that's dropping off and 20 years and China is such a little desire in any unpredictable conflict despite the linking world and can only count for benefits that isolated ran the raising Moscow have no competition with credit competition and there's no chance the RGC will definitely block a deal because they empirically will cause wars.
7:53 now. Stopped at 650 is what I have.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to start on your answers to the inducements planks of the counter plan. So why would South Korea, like why is South Korea developing all of this like UUV tech and like all the tech that was outlined in the White Sea as destabilizing?
Yeah, South Korea is developing that now because they have an incentive to not push their own defensive domestic or defensive capabilities because they think that the U.S. is going to protect them defensively. Our evidence says that new shocks in the alliance cause them to shift their priorities
So
towards
the only reason
beneficial
why
things.
South Korea isn't shifting is like they think the U.S. will come to their defense.
Well,
Why
no,
would they?
it's
Why
not.
would
It's
they
not just that they think. It's
know?
not just that they think that the U.S. will come to the defense. It's because there's a rut in the alliance, and everything is continuously boring. Our Joe evidence says that they're just continuously continuing their defense and offensive policies because they're they're significantly kind of bored with the alliance. They think that things are going to continue the
So
way
your
they are.
argument is like South Korea is bored because the U.S. isn't like changing it up enough. If that's true, then if the U.S.
the Joe evidence really good on
the
that.
U.S. essentially induces South Korea, tells them we want you to do this policy, we will give you a bunch of incentives that will improve your economy, etc. Why would they say no?
Yeah, the problem with inducements for is because all of our Joe evidence and our other piece of evidence, the Hoffman or the Kim evidence, also say that there needs to be domestic innovation on UUVs,
But
and that
again,
the military will
why can this
continually
domestic innovation not
reprioritize
be
funds in
increased?
bad ways. It says the military will prioritize funds in bad ways, and says that there needs to be a competitive market where
I understand
UUV
that there
development
is
and
a need
ISR
for
gets
these
developed.
things, but my
What?
question is more of like, why are these things so like difficult to do for South Korea that if the U.S. like gives them a shit ton of money to do it, like why
The
would they
U.S.
say
gives
no?
the government money, doesn't solve anything. There needs to be private domestic
So
innovation.
the other question
The
I have
other thing is that there needs to be competitive markets.
on the assurance dissad, the Stapleton card says only failing to uphold your commitment in a crisis will hurt credibility. Have you read any evidence anywhere that says the U.S. will not uphold its commitment to South Korea if South Korea goes to war? Like if the U.S. doesn't uphold their commitment, how do you have any drawing scenarios at all?
No, the Stapleton evidence says that if we renege and pull back commitments, it won't cause any crises because the only thing that matters is if we continue to uphold what we've said we would do, which means the counter plan is probably more dangerous because the
so
MDT
how does this make any conceptual sense? So the U.S. reneges on a commitment, and South Korea is like, oh, you haven't reneged on the remaining commitments, so I guess that's fine. Like, is that South Korea's logic?
What I'm confused as to what you're saying. Our evidence indicates that if the U.S. From a broader credibility perspective in international relations, which is what your impact is about, from a broader level, if we pull back commitments, it's not going to cause a cascading credibility problem because they only care if the U.S. has failed to uphold its treaty obligations. If we change treaty obligations, they're not worried that we're going to do that to them in other areas. You didn't read the South Korea impact.
Okay. 650.
Did you all say condo?
Yeah.
Stopped at 156. All right, borders, dip cap, advantage 1, advantage 2. Sorry, I realized I was muted. Did I give the order? Okay. The Iran war caused extinction, even limited conflict spirals regionally, sets the Middle East ablaze in trust in Pakistan, Russia, and China, which first intentional miscalculated nuclear war that every single detonation to NASA. Let's get 17 nukes are more powerful in simulations. Fuse 1 produce nuclear trap by regional relationships. The U.S. and Iran in the desert Middle East. A single explosion could ignite oil resource and create great climate impacts. Iran retaliates with bioweapons extinction. Sterling 18. The first use is directed against Iranian facilities. Iranis launch biological terrorism. This will utilize DNA viruses designed to spread throughout the human vectors. There are a few differences of real war, but because of Russian Chinese responsible multiple theaters, 21st century weaponry will be Armageddon. The 2AC1 is permutation. Do both. Links and net benefit. The plan burns finite diplomatic capital. Allies are worst case thinkers. Resist any change to their defense. The plan signals either the last resolve or to defend them or a status downgrade. Both can either be offset with diplomatic offensives to convince them of their continued importance. That's Anderson. The plan links, even if allies like it. Biden promised increasing commitments of the plans, both from the blue. That's the opposite of what they expect. At minimum, requires efforts to recalibrate the alliances. Fiat causes unexpected policy shifts, causes confusion, forces trade-off. Arcadis 11, confusion undermines the coherence and effectiveness of all foreign policy, which is possible to track each hypothetical to any country. Doesn't CFO costs are huge. It is nearly impossible to see if focus trade-offs at a global level. The result is crowding out when FOPO results in reallocation resources to a new hotspot. The next argument is stimulus and foreign policy thumpers. All those are priced in. Our evidence is extremely recent and indicates that Iran is Biden's first foreign policy initiative that he will take on board. It's currently top priority. Wackenheim 21. Biden knows more FOPO than any president since Nixon. The bigger question is how to marshal talents as state priority number 1. The Iran Accord. Iranians have increased the uranium production threatening the bloc inspectors. Sanctions are not lifted. There's no trade-off between domestic and foreign policy shifts. Can see that argument from the politics is that they say no deal for years. This proves escalation. No. Next argument is that there's no diplomatic resources. There's no trade-off. Air diplomatic resources are spread thing. 1. Overstretch from Trumpism. Howard 21. Under Trump, the U.S. has lost prestige and diplomatic capital. Biden will have to work cut out to recover the China emerge. The Middle East has been up, and in particular, Iran. The LIO has taken a bearing. COVID has succeeded in bringing home vulnerability. 2. Understaffed from nomination delays. Kramer 311. Finance yet to name nominees. Christine Post has stated Biden vows to restore the State Department, but efforts hit its snag. Trump's refusal to accept results kept pushing back on the timeline. Nominees paperwork, background checks. It's just a cascading effect. 3. Underfunded from the Trump budget. Sherman 20 for how the U.S. organizes diplomatic tools. A much bigger diplomacy threat would have great value, but is no guarantee in light of years of long declines in the State Department funding. Their evidence is also old, doesn't assume new trends in the State Department. Their next argument is that there's been no deal for years and that the U.S. would be unable to create a deal. There is escalation, even if there's been no deals for years. So the situation is highly intense. Iran can nuclearize, which causes conflagration in the future, even if there's been no deal in the past. The counter plan is able to resolve those tensions. It would spill over the Strait of Hormuz, Iraq, and Yemen. Kabul and 20 war effects in the Middle East. Hormuz, Iraq, or Yemen is far from inevitable. The action, the unintentional consequences, conflict possible. Trigger happy actors, guarantee nuclear use. Kabul and 20 world unification. They doomsday possibility, escalating tension alliances. The last thing Mideast one is another conflict, let alone a nuclear one. The fear remains trigger happy, decide to usher in a mushroom cloud. The counterplan also resolves uniqueness. It breaks the stalemate by easing sanctions and bringing Iran to the table. Romani wants to save his deal, but can't without the Ayatollah support, which creates a U.S. concession first. Let's BG, but negotiations key. Success requires investing diplomatic resources to hammer out details. Broader negotiations of ballistic missiles, Iranian proxies can be addressed diplomatically, but investing resources now is crucial to secure peace. That's Nasser. They didn't read a card for deal fails, so I won't read one in the 2NC. Advantage 1. No North Korean war. Both sides are vulnerable to each other's capabilities, which breeds strategic restraint. That's posed especially over the Yellow Sea. Evidence indicates that trade ties and historically denied accidents so to escalate. That's high in evidence. Regime survival concerns outweighs post 21. The U.S. allies appear rational and goal is to keeping a regime alive. Himself in power. Kim is aware any aggressive behavior could end the regime. He has no reason to doubt U.S. capability to respond to threats. Kim has little incentive to the U.S. to turn. Korean war is unlikely. Horowitz and Sanders 18 geography and capabilities matter more than leader geography. War was less likely. Artillery points at Seoul south. Repose of war. China keeps north. Of China does not want a unified peninsula. All sides know that a war would be a huge and difficult. There are strong incentives to deter rather than escalate. The rational to stay in power. War would end the regimes. The next argument is miscalculation. Miscalculation denied. There have been accidents historically didn't escalate. The missile question is who launches a missile first. They have not provided a reason why South Korea would randomly go rogue. All of our evidence assumes COVID, especially the cards from 2021. China won't intervene. Lawak 18. The notion that China is Korea's protector is out of date. The Xi support for economic sanctions, including a blockade of oil, amounts to a change of size. Anyone who believes China would act on Korea's behalf has not been paying attention. The alliance also solves moral hazard thing, and all 14 allies are well positioned to resolve disputes. Allies make credible threats and influence bargaining about disputes. Allies may affect the target making settlement more likely to develop a 3-player model. Dyadic models are inadequately befriend a large and test allies judge alliances for conflicts, but even when challenges are not, allies facilitate peaceful settlement. No Korean entrapment. Kelly 19. Seoul has been a loyal, well-behaved ally in a tough world, not using commitment to pursue reckless options. False Washington does not have a record of reckless driving. Clients in the Middle East, Arabia, Israel, Egypt, Turkey have long, in contrast to docile Korea. Korea wouldn't expect we take the lead. Bush 16 is wrong to assume the U.S. would bear the burden. Korean forces are capable. They plan. If war, of course, they have the primary responsibilities. The U.S. would play a supporting role. Allies knowledge we have their backs, give them the confidence to fight and die. EMPs are weak. Galt says there's no impact. There's not enough juice. An EMP with enough power to pose a threat requires the power of nuclear bombs. So states have no incentive to independently use EMPs for retaliation. 2, there's not enough return. EMPs are untested, expensive, and don't do anything nukes cannot. No actual invest in them instead. Oh. My BioD overview got cut, so I'll add it. Well, actually, I'll have Kelly read it. The subs advantage. First of all, I'll send this card out later. No subs. Kim 20. Why does Korea want nuclear submarines? In South Korea's case, there's little rationale for nuclear submarines. Pursuing them may not be worth the political financial cost. International agreements prevent Korea from acquiring the fuel necessary to power them. Then the next argument is that there's going to be no naval accidents. Or evidence is highly specific and it indicates that the submarine accidents would not actually create nuclear conflict. It's happened historically. It's never escalated. There are also no dead zones impacts because algae blooms are caused by human activities already, and there's massive all causes. But even so, it would not cause a worldwide cataclysm like they expect because it simply does not spill over from one issue to another. Drones also won't cause war. Horowitz, like L-16 drones are not a civil war. Drones fly slower than aircraft. Only Air Force General described the most advanced drones as useless countries. The air defense systems are weapons to shoot down the slow-moving drones. Hamas discovered this when it flew as a drone into Israel. Data, it's totally debilitating. Horowitz at L-16, the data link creates vulnerability. Drones must be linked by radio. Data links can easily be jammed to debilitate. Hackers could mimic GPS signals and fuel the navigation systems. Cyber attacks could cause a drone to be unable to calculate its position, allowing it to be brought down easily. The pilots get sad. Horowitz 16 deployment is limited by the pilot's operators. Sit for 14 hours, days, and log in 4 times as many hours as pilots have piloted aircraft. Long hours create boredom, loneliness, and post-traumatic stress. Despite having been trained at rates higher than a fighter and bomber pilots combined, drone pilots left the service at 3 times, 85%. In 2015, the figure dropped to 65%. Of these challenges exist for the U.S., the country with the most extensive pilot training systems. They likely exist for others. So redundancies also check. Horowitz et al. 16 UAVs duplicate other systems. Helicopters, missiles, and aircraft perform the same functions as drones, and they are far less vulnerable to anti-air defense systems. I'll also send out the BioD stuff. Go back to the other advantage. BioD can't collapse or threaten human extinction. Montoya compiled 600 experiments to show that no tipping point exists even in local ecosystems. Damage is gradual, leaving time for adaptation. The Permian extinction proves that life can thrive in any condition. BioD loss is an existential creep. In Carranza 18, there is little evidence. It is to imagine data where identify the threshold results do not point to existential risk. Data are driven by small-scale experiments of local observations. Those are not existential. Little evidence species from elsewhere can replace local losses. No one is forecasting the loss of 90% of species of global BioD were halved. What would be the mechanism for the end of civilization? There's also no impact for pollution. And Carranza 18, excessive chemical pollution, atmospheric aerosol, landing constitutions, boundaries, scalpel wheel, posing ourselves to extinction. Nations increase their wealth, clean up the air and water, and reduce pollution. Economies become more circular. Environmental damage is likely to decline. Pollutants are so widely recognized, and consequences of local events are so immediate, it's reasonable to expect the governments to avoid it. There was one more card I wanted to read. This is awkward. Aha, I found it. North Korea's attacks remain limited. Kutsa and Sukhov 17 researches as a cyber of little to no impact operation, either provoked nor deterred. Let me compile those cards. Sorry about that. Never trust the tilde function, I guess. Okay, sent. My bad.
I'm gonna get those pulled up before cross-ex.
Yeah.
Ready for cross-ex?
Yep.
Cool. So, what evidence do you have that says that Biden can successfully negotiate a deal right now?
I believe our 1NC card makes that prediction.
And where does it say that?
Yep. It says that Rouhani is willing to make a deal. It requires removing sanctions first. It says that the deal was working well in the past and can be revived. It says that Biden is trying low-key diplomatic moves right now, and that can secure compliance.
Okay, the internal stuff, it says that they're overstretched from fixing Trumpism, they're understaffed from nomination delays, and there's underfunded as well. How do all those things not disprove the fact that the deal can happen?
Well, it's a
If those are all challenges
Our
for,
evidence
for them right
assumes
now.
that Biden has limited diplomatic resources and will prioritize diplomatic capital first towards Iran.
Okay, and what evidence says that he and the State Department are going on a full court press in the Middle East right now?
Wagenheim.
Of Iran. Yeah. Is that the one you just reread?
Priority number one, the Iran Accord. Iranians have
it's
increased
priority
uranium
of
production.
it says it's his priority, but it doesn't say that he's doing things there right now aside from small things by himself, right?
What do you mean by himself?
Your card
He
just
has
says
the
Biden. This is
entire
the whole State
United
Department.
States government behind him.
And where does it say
Like
that?
he is the president of
Are
the
you
United
just making
States.
that up? Where does it say that all
Am
the
I
State
making up
Departments
that
say?
he's president of the United States?
No. Are you making up that
Like
there's
that
a
he-
full court State Department press in Iran right now?
Well, our evidence indicates it's his number one foreign
It's
policy
his number one priority that he listed to the public in America. Yeah. Okay.
I disagree.
Why would this? Well, your card doesn't. Why would the sanctions not be a larger incentive for a deal? Sanctions reduction not be a larger incentive for a deal than just like something like the plan happening? Like, why would that not just
Well,
like
removing
immediately incentivize a deal?
sanctions helps Iran come to the table, but that alone would be insufficient.
I'm
Our
wondering what.
evidence
Okay.
indicates you still need to grease the skids to create a new diplomatic deal.
And what card says that there needs to be a full court State Department press and they can't focus on any other issues?
I think our 1 and C card says that.
Well, your 1 and C link card says there will be a trade-off, but I don't know what card says that a trade-off would cause a deal to fail.
I think it says that it will cause a deal to fail.
Okay, where?
By giving him substantial to point to, the Biden team might help grease the skids for an arrangement by which both parties come to compliance. Then plausibly say,
Not that he's doing it
let's
right now.
talk for more.
Nasser card, so more past the deal. Nasser card that you didn't read, but inserted in the 2NC says Biden must return swiftly and fully to the 2015 agreement. How does the counterplan solve that?
Well, the counter plan helps him return to the agreement by decreasing sanctions.
And what
that
card do
were
you have that says
prohibited
that
by the agreement.
he will return to the deal?
All of our evidence indicates Biden wants to restore the Iran deal. Like what?
I'm sending it out now. The order is trilateralism, infrastructure, then the assurance decide. Sorry, my laptop's like glitching. Okay, should be sent. Okay, is anyone not ready? Okay. No impact, we're not going for the politics aside, considered no passage, we're not going for the assurance that proliferate ways user illicit pressures and new terror guarantee extinction it turns North Korea, Asian nuclear powers make North Korea and Chinese preemption inevitable, makes draws in the US through security commitments, turns biod and algae blooms nuclear detonation, sends smoke into the atmosphere, seeps into the oceans and clusters biod much faster. Now the link turns frames for the link turns one, the link is always faster because the links are turned as soon as the app passes, whereas the turns are contingent on a North Korean attack or Korea developing UUVs in time too, so none other evidence has these issues of military interoperability are sufficient to cause proliferation or even South Korea to doubt the US's commitment. Every warrant is about problems and coordination. A nice FYI is about military policy, but not numbers. 3 said there's no uniqueness. Even if there are probes, there's no the allies don't think the US will will respond. Defense facts are credible and aggression. 21 minorities over the alliances are to the war, which is by we're hard to for the alliances for multi allies because of the healthy and also the alliances for the history to plans and has the alliances for the Jewish Philippines for the ancestors by Washington Korea has been supported over Trump and overload these strengths alliance reassurance stalls prolific now Blakeman 21 Americans by Morris to echo the minus efforts for the reassurances to be allies or arms and policies used in new treaties are the most supporting countries that come to each other's defense countries that come in the writing countries for the representative clause of writing the promises of each other's times of need. No subs Kim 21 South Korea when you subsidy Korea for the many other large little restaurant and nuclear subsidies for the not for the political financial and international agreements prevent Korea for the field necessary for the use of drugs purchase or indigenous capacity. The link is massive. I know that one ear is itching to spin the app as the consult mechanism, but you should not fall for it. The 1AC mandates that there has to be a reduction in the U.S.'s alliance commitment to Korea. That means if Korea comes to the table and says that it does not want any commitments, the app topically overrides them and strong arms Korea to agree to reductions. South Korea clearly wants protection in the Yellow Sea and against some North Korean provocations now, which is the thesis of their entrapment scenario. The app ends at completely the act of strong army allies is by revising this text of the legal commitment will reverberate globally. NATO, the Philippines, and Japan will wonder whether the U.S. will force consultations to reduce commitments in the future and trigger global credibility crisis. Treaty commitments are secretary of the planet, cherry picking corruption. Nazi treaty commitments are secretary of the planet. There will be such a limited commitments and commitments with the Chinese for the ready for the U.S. will fulfill the only commitments to reach the the commitments globally everywhere. Now is the crucial window. Less than 20 maybe optimism every leader appreciate the position we distinct with the predecessors that drawing the archival documents for my experience and the reputation for the national credibility or limits and nations can be credibility in other world leaders that form their every stage of the leadership of the China zero way to the result after trying that other leaders are harsh have long marriages, touching the legal commitments, breakdowns, reputations, per 19th hour, art of the consistent pursuing the allies one by fight around the great risk and causing suffer causing capacity where they intend to deliver the part of the communications that made the countries behave they sold communities defense treaties and so the instruments communicate with the credibility to researching the value obviously the committee the obligations to teach the republic of the initial defense decision they reassure because reneging when applied loss of reputation especially defense tax process the agreement create the reputational cost for the U.S. card U.S. Navy explicit defense or other senior reneg would the U.S. reputational collective agreements signed by the entire system of the U.S. is the basis for collective agreements. They say shocks are good. This is wholly irrelevant. We're reading a TA about global cred. The court is only about
Kelly, can you answer Kondo and kick the counterplans? I thought I said. So I chatted the Kondo stuff in the chat.
Okay. So counterplan Kondo. We get infinite Kondo against a new F1 deck plugs, protect the 2-1R against add-ons, infinite preps, and first and last speeches. 2 dispose Kondo in disguise, circumvented by the planks 3T, 1 card DAs and framework case, all thumb, all F offense, 4 cross applications and timing to advocacies of diminishing marginal utility, 5 combine the counterplans instead of rejecting the team. Theory is arbitrary, all theory arguments are reasons to reject the argument that the team occurrence are obviously all attempts of competition. Now back to the DA, reneging on Korean commitments causes great global doubts. Jackson 15, the reneging of the commitment does over the commercial commitments. If this has the U.S. is fully for the team, then other teams only the reason the commitments to or even NATO won't hold up. This card is also bullshit. One, it does not assume an alteration of the defense pacts, even if previous disagreements to the alliance like troop stationing or trade deals could have been smoothed over with talks touching the legal foundation of the relationship is distinct. 2, the unilateral form of the plan produces ally backlash still in 5 allies probably over the U.S. if the decision with NATO goes to top of the allies to let the president trouble with the wrath of position belief that unilateral decision is time that use the time to direct specifically close to the U.S. choices to regard for views of the closest allies. Also, South Korea resisted plan but via lost an insider. AC the response to deadly relations over the U.S. and DC alliance commitment over involved in intensive lobbying and they went efforts to short the commitment to feel Korea will shows to show the self-defense efforts including the nukes. Link alone turns the ensures alliance deterrence is fractured, can't respond to North Korea and will come more and Korea will become more autonomous with the UUV tech. Also, they say failing to uphold will hurt credibility. This is not a link turn. There's zero evidence that the U.S. will not respond to our commitment to Korea now. And Stapleton is wrong about credibility. Reductions will cascade. Allies believe it. Rachel and Mitchell 17 hesitation for the reliability of NATO was the Philippines seeks to figure out the U.S. is willing to pursue the security priority leaders wants to look for other reasons to pursue some of their reputation just saw and state leaders to reach the stronger pressure for the U.S. allies, key sponsors and wants of the U.S.'s other allies of an opinion about reliability and credibility for its proliferation. For example, for 16 multiple case studies where the alliance has helped the decision not to proliferate even with the security side of the driver into security equipment deciding to proliferate parties only see the bomb the job the U.S. protection multiple research projects to unpack the conditions you consider credibility of the alliance committee alliances likelihood of cascades security by the U.S. is recently the most comprehensive statistical study the states are pulling when the states do not find a guarantee. They say no impact or cascade. Yes, snowball. According to as Secretary Schultz said, the prolific because prolific adversaries were likely to require the use history can be written one chain reaction prolific lethal projects. If a 1 n plus 1 probably nearly prolific as many reasons for the present new additional states dozens of states have the capability brings in coil 15 the potential war prolific is the direction of the IE for the United States to present technology to make the use and more the attention by launch to make the bomb is no longer opponent decides any country entering the blocks for nuclear arsenal exercises tools to solve for the readily use of usable rates occur once they see the use of delivery could create the epidemic. Also, South Korea unreliability will spill over Hegel at all 20 with the allies race record the most areas also MCA successors to the U.S. allies where they can rely on Washington for these events regarding the bomb Biden will reach our allies. This is likely to be doable. France invited Europe to use it to turn Turkey to turn the interest of the odds of the relativity more than temporary logic could be renewed. Turkey pulled cause its nuclear war, chronic every 16 impulsive the Turkey according to news balance, being at level like that. Communication tab like the missile tower, the secretary, the Turkey according like a Canada nuclear weapons France, modernizing cause nuclear war, the 17 France, when it occurs to greater arsenal, they choose will never accept the limited war instead of relies on ultimate warning results as less credibility uses to be a little more time France is not a small nuclear arsenal on nuclear France attacking parties likely to launch LOW. For the card at LOW. I don't think I sent those, so I'll send it out. All right, sent it.
I'm gonna pull that up, and then I'm pretty sure our time's at 7:45, but I don't think it's in the chat, so just want to make sure that's cool. Me too. Yeah, me neither. I'll just. All right. Ready? Cool. All right, 7:45, starting now. We stop with 3 minutes left.
Oh my god, I totally lost the Zoom link. I was like, where the hell did it go? The order is going to be advantage 1, then advantage 2, then the dip cap DA, and the pro lift DA. Is anyone not ready? You have water? Can I get a sip of water real quick? Sorry, can I get a sip of water? Yeah. Just 1 second. All right, my mouth's a little dry. Anyone not ready? None of their defense assumes coming north provocations or trigger disproportionate south response to the draw in the US and China that escalate. It assumes COVID happens faster because COVID creates political pressure for limited incursions. That's the Hamel, Green, and Molman evidence. It postdates all their stuff and says that there's unique pressure to escalate now. Miscalculation goes nuclear. D doesn't assume misattributed mutual support, history, report communication, and COVID forwarding news. That's the Hamel, Green evidence. They also conceded the internal OPCON transition incentivizes North Korean first strike, which escalates only the abstract tension of general decision-making, cohesion, counterattacks, and successfully transition. That's the Kim evidence. They say regime. There's none of their defense assumes South Korean preemption from overreaction. That escalates injurious conflict. Dalton, 20 periodic changes to mental turns into the rate conflict, escalation by small stake DPRK technical provisions getting to lead to major war use of nuclear relations from 2010 to South overhaul the proactive deterrence and fights the escalation to Russian retaliation to tactical provisions. Mark the Carter provision. That means South Korea will respond to small skirmishes now, but none of their defense assumes it. North obviously escalates. It feels it threatens the regime. The China does intervene. Our evidence is way better. It's categorically different. It says that China has an incentive and has credibility tied to the region. They also fear the United States at the border. The alliance doesn't solve moral hazard. The argument relies on alliance clarity. The force evidence is not about Korea. It's also relies on alliance clarity right now. It's not. It doesn't consider the entrapment scenario that goes the other way. The LC is unique. The 2AC is way better and has way better internal based on their perceived reaction to skirmishes. They will concede no EMP or BioD. We're not going for either of them. The second advantage. Not going for the underwater impact. We're going for drones, warming related algal blooms, trigger extinction through region collapse, dry biodiversity, death, and tropic system collapse. That's the musto evidence. None of their defense matters. The spillover musto card is really good. It says the systems are connected. The biod evidence from the 1AC says the SK region is key. No biodiversity collapse assumes algae bloom runoff. The more oxygen it takes, the more it replicates. It's a positive feedback loop. The drone's defense is about war, not algae blooms. This is the internal, so none of it resolves the MT shock breaks alliance complacency in favor of increased domestic aerosol development, which spills over to commercial justice. Joe Hoffman and Kim, the dip cap DA. Didn't do enough on the impact. The Iran war defense was super good. It says that the Iran won't have incentive to escalate because they know that they lose in the conflict and they wouldn't want to escalate against the United States. The history of the collapse proves that the uniqueness is impacting is definitely wrong. They don't have any short-term scenario, nor do they turn the case in any way. There's no chance it affects North Korea in any way, shape, or form. Iran war will escalate. Pitchy, 20 house relations between the US and Iran is the biggest fast factors. Aviation ability, during this relations. At number 8, the US group staff will skill much response involving close eliminating the clear and standard US multiple hours. Trump the lines of turns capacity, and no, it's still strike at 15 though. Likely to play strike has been exaggerated a long time ago into this real bombs. As if Saddam series reactor to be the other until standard last minute strike is likelihood they build a bomb. The initial texting regime will give the NPT kick out inspectors mark the carded inspectors the uniqueness debate. I'll do it here. There's none of the evidence cards that says that the deal's coming down. Biden will negotiate, or that Biden needs people to get him to get it done. It just says that he would it mattered in the State of the Union. If actually the State Department inevitably and should trigger the uniqueness problem, or the permutations enough because we create massive incentives for a deal, and the plan is tiny. Evidence just said it would be good if Biden did it. Not that he will. We insert a yellow re-highlighting the BG card and no, the full recommitments required. No evidence says it will happen. We inserted the NASA card. We inserted the NASA card. It says that Biden will return quickly and fully to the 2015 agreement. That means that he doesn't return to it, or it stalls in the status quo. Rejoining is not up to the national leaders, which takes out the Link Watkins. 2-5. There's an agreement that JHP will fully negotiate. The fact that it is interested both of them and around the field against it is not down. The government's CRG is dominant and supported by the Kamani. Mark the card at Kamani. The Middle East war impact they went for. There's no Middle East escalation. Imran in 2-6. The international Islamic conflict in the Middle East is participated by the international sanctions already. The proxy wars we see power because they're cheap. Conflict involves denouncing international interstate conflicts, claims different the actions for those that could be able to every world's Middle East stock market proxy organization, Berkeley card organizations. The link debate. They said different people. There's no evidence that said the State Department. The court's counter plan said that it could be done through multiple processes. That means the U.S. Foreign Service has the plan. There's no link Weintraub. 17th, the Foreign Service the other relations to those states is more cheaper and effective. Diplomatic as an idea is fake, which means no spillover. So hey, 14th, idea of diplomatic overseas the distraction. Iran and the Middle East are keeping these women. That we think it's hard. We're also seeing misguided relations and geopolitical relations. The overcoming hypothesis loss for the U.S. state for the world is one another. Mark the card another. We're not going to read the next couple cards. Go to the pro FDA. No prolif cascades. Decades of data disprove cascades are alarmist, and because decisions are made internally, sanctions, international relations, and security environments all this way, and that's the Mueller evidence. Their links are impact D because allies want stability in U.S. relations. Getting nukes sends that new card doesn't assume that the time frame it takes alliances don't solve proliferation. 18 leaders, other presence of the other states decided political environmental factors. The bureaucracy NPT undermines claims to security through proliferation. Allies commitments have proliferation. Insurance case is not unique. It doesn't assume the ASP mechanism which solves escalation. No evidence that South Korea would proliferate. Everyone's reassured. Turkey proliferate possible. And 19 years whenever has nuclear weapons programs and infrastructure built on the nuclear technology built on this take long of the plan to be avoided built on pro earthquakes. Even if I accuse it completed in the reverse of the second world war, and there's likely which is have means to make nuclear weapons. The Moscow's no interest in making Turkey which have stopped a nuclear weapon to develop nukes. Mark the card at nukes and no France mod the modernization devil. They also called for they've already called for it now because the Turkey business proves it is unique. The assurance has collapsed now. The continuous and impending North probing and uncredible degrees on assurance to South Korea assurance are making it look like U.S. is unable to respond to crisis. That's the Bush, Kim, and Manzo UN evidence impending Afghan failure incentivized North attacks at fraction. They can see the Afghan internal form case and new EU UVs collapse in NATO. Naval and operations military efficacy. All these mean this inevitable collapse of the alliance, and North Korea full-blown military attacks would make it look weak for assurance. It's the link, the AF saves global assurances that was done above. The North Korea outweighs the turns the as a consultation. If Korea doesn't want security agreements, then there's no link to the DA. Kelly, this is terrible. They know no way to get to the process link. Manzo's way better. Think back to 1CCX. There's no evidence that they would say no. The plan is super clear. They can see the trail at link D that they would want to negotiate with the United States. Crimea proves a reassurance solves the aggressive 19 after Crimea and NATO pledge adopt the recommitted percentage. They lead to Korea readiness attacking the fighters. Asian flank about the towns that 3 battalions BT flank logistics was updated, and we told Canada we didn't defend them. Thumbs the NAT links Shrinkman 17 day general the U.S. would defend the state, but the credibility of the U.S. the commitment to defend Canada the back top officer with this division. It's a big deal. There's no chance that they categorize the link as what it is. 1CCX proves that they are just wrong about it.
I believe it's like 2:30. Starting now.
I think I had you all at 145, pretty sure.
My bad. I think I miswrote it down. I'll subtract 45 seconds. So that leaves me at 110. Okay, that's time. Assurance, diff cap, advantage 2, advantage 1.
You said 2, then 1?
2, then 1. Yep. And then I think Kelly's going to send out a card. All right. Proliferation outweighs. They have dropped the impacts of proliferation. Both nuclear terrorism make nuclear war more likely, especially for North Korea, which interacts with non-state actors as well as user to loser pressures, causes preemption before it. They have dropped the deterrence North Korea because of Asian powers make North Korea and China more likely to engage in conflict and preempting nuclear arsenals before they finish. It also turns the biodiversity algal bloom scenarios because a nuclear winter that comes across as the war is much faster and turns it faster. Yes, cascades. They drop the Hegel evidence, which indicates that the global assurances are on the brink. It indicates that dozens of countries are on the brink. It cites Turkey, France, Germany, as well as South Korea and Japan. All of them are on the brink. There's only a risk that a news shock to the alliance would be able to cause it. None of their, all the which answers all their cascade answers the Wolford evidence also answers their no security commitments cause the stop proliferation argument. It indicates that there the consensus of studies as well as alarming amounts of case studies as well as statistics indicate that it's much more likely that security commitments for solved wars. The chronic evidence indicates that the proliferation is an N+1 problem, which means that it is much more likely that one state alone could cause global proliferation, but we only need to win one proliferation. Our Burns evidence indicates that only one country is proliferating would be enough. They have dropped Japan is likely to proliferate, which means that that one is conceded as well as the Korea. They have no defense extended in the 1AR to Korea other than Link D. So as long as we win that Korea dislikes the plan, that is enough to cause the link threshold. Now, the argument about alarmism is disproven because it is a question of security commitments in the past. The bureaucracy argument is wrong because bureaucracy is now oriented towards no proliferation, but that would shift in a world in which the U.S. is not perceived as secure. Their next card just says the word economics and the MPT, which doesn't, which is not an argument, and moreover, it just says that there are alternative causes of proliferation, not that it would be able to solve it. The link is massive. Remember in Crossix when they are answering questions about flexible response that the plan's mandate prohibits activation against Korea's wishes, i.e. it creates a strategic shock that will induce Korea to change its drone posture as well as be less aggressive in a North Korean scenario. The entire point of the alliance is that it's premised upon an unconditional offer to defend them. That's the Grossman card, which indicates that alliances are remarkably high now. They've dropped the link will always be faster than the link turn, which answers to the Sloan evidence indicates that even if Korea would like the substance of the plan, the fact that they're not consulted and they're warned that activation will not be permitted is what caused them. The Snyder card indicates that they think through the worst case and that would cause more yes to France modernization. Indicates that it's premised upon the security umbrella and that only modernization would be enough to trigger conflict. So that should lower the link threshold. Yes, Turkey our evidence indicates that they have the capabilities as well as the will, provided the U.S. stops it. The North Korean probing argument can turn the DISAD faster than the DISAD turns case because the North Korean probing would not escalate in the short term. Moreover, the Grossman evidence indicates that Korea is assured now, even if it would attack now, the OPCON transfer is slow, which is the reason that it would not collapse the alliance in the short term. The UUV's evidence, they have no evidence connecting it to the collapse of the alliance. It just says that it could hurt it in the abstract. North Korea doesn't outweigh the gray zone provocations would never escalate. Now the process links we have turned their yes, there is a link or evidence indicates that Korea would dislike the plan because they would either be a window of opportunity between when Korea is a promise to be defended, i.e. the U.S. announces that activation is no longer permitted. Korea then has to consult with the United States about whether or not the what situations that happens it is given to the global stage. So in the near term, South Korea would be insecure. The Crimea proves argument is a new argument. Reassurance would also fail because the U.S. capabilities, because the U.S. umbrella would be undermined. They are wrong about the Canada thumper. It's also news, so scratch it off their flow. Their evidence goes next. Sherkman 17 general pronounced the U.S. will not defend its neighbor. The extension of the U.S. Their card ends. Even if there's a missile strike and hits Canada, it's inconceivable for many of us to think the U.S. would turn to Canada. You know what, guys? You're on your own because you didn't join the missile defense. Canada, the U.S. are going to come to each other's aid. The cross-ex argument was answered above. The DIPCAP can see there's no Middle East escalation. Can see the permits, the test competition advantage too. They can't go for this advantage when they can see the biodiversity collapse does not cause extinction. It would not cause food shocks because global species are by and large resilient. Our evidence cites mass extinctions that have occurred in the past, including an asteroid strike on the planet that caused what would look like a nuclear winter, and that would not be sufficient to cause the collapse of the species. Algal blooms themselves do not spill over, and they have no evidence that indicates that there would be food shocks. We have a meta-analysis. They have random of the reporters that don't have qualifications or cite any studies saying that algal blooms would cause war. There's now the other advantage. There's no North Korea war. There's also the post evidence indicates that they're vulnerable to a South Korean attack, but South Korea is likewise vulnerable to a North Korean attack, which prevents escalation. The Yellow Sea would never escalate. Our evidence assumes COVID and says that accidents in the past haven't escalated, and that COVID causes countries to look inward instead. Korea, both South and North Korea, would be concerned about domestic problems, which is the reason that they would turn inward rather than outwards, because they have material constraints. The Horowitz evidence was dropped and indicates that geographic constraints prevent war in general because artillery on both sides are pointed right against each other, which means that even if there was a low level provocation, there wouldn't be a war. Ofcon transfer has been happening for decades. There's no reason that would escalate. The thing evidence says that the link turns case any risk that the alliance is dropped off and creates a inability for the U.S. to restrain Korea. The Kelly evidence indicates that Korea has been restrained in the past, and the Bush evidence knows that Korea would have to take the first steps in its own defense, which means that the U.S. wouldn't defend them immediately, which is a reason that they wouldn't escalate the conflict. Yeah.
We have 3 minutes, and I'll start with a question for you. I'm starting now. What was the link turns case card you were sending at the very bottom right there?
Bang.
Thing. Okay. It'll be advantage 1 and then DA. Yeah, I'll go advantage 1, advantage 2, DA. Cool. Is anyone not ready? Sweet. North Korea provocations are coming now. They test the alliance by cyber-attacking, limited military counters, missile tests, and others that trigger disproportionate South Korean attack that draws the U.S. and China in and causes extinction. South Korea has operational policy and domestic pressures that encourage immediate escalation in the North, responding kind that draws in the U.S., China, and allies, which outweighs the Dalton evidence. It's way better than their defense on South Korea escalating. They have disproportionate retaliation posture and are eager to respond hard because of past failures and the domestic humiliations after the 2011 Cheonan attacks. The Molman evidence and the new Dalton evidence as it escalates and our no-go impact cards better than their South Korea, better than their Horowitz evidence that it doesn't prevent escalation because the South Korea will launch a disproportionate attack, which gets perceived as launching the regime-ending attack from North Korea because they have a massive fear of regime-ending attacks, and then that will sort of escalate, inevitably draws China in, which goes conceding the to an R, which means that any sort of small-scale tensions will always escalate China in, which potential tensions now heighten the chance of conflict. Allied villain magnifies the chance of miscalculation strategic incentive to protect its borders, which means the defense assumed nuclear use on the Chinese border, which forces attack, which is a much broader impact. Multiple foreign policy analysts have analyzed all foreign crises from China to AI to warming and concluded that Korean conflict is the greatest risk that happens next year, which are Snyder evidence that should frame your impact calculus and probability and time frame because it's the only comparative evidence, and we definitely outweigh on time frame because the North Korean provocations are happening now. Impact happens faster because COVID creates political pressure for limited incursions, and both sides have policies that encourage faster escalation in other conflicts. Hamel Green and Moment is definitely built into their defense policies, which means it's definitely better. Opcon stuff, we're not going for it. Advantage 2. Yeah, I'll do the link turns case stuff here. The link turns case argument is categorically wrong. Don't extrapolate more than the 2 and R said. The Fang evidence doesn't say anything. It says the allies deter conflicts generally, but doesn't actually apply to the North Korean provocations. Escalating provocations now disproved because the North isn't experiencing any proportional retaliation, which only the AF solves. This doesn't assume alliance collapse now, which also disproves the direction of the debate, and the AF link defense definitely disproves this. Also, we definitely have a solvency mechanism. We don't escalate. The South Korea won't attack in the status quo. Our man's evidence says they won't attack without the U.S. protection because it will cause massive fears of bigger retaliation. Also, the U.S. not getting drawn in means they can't escalate to any sort of nuclear war, which means there's no terminal impact to it. The DA. Or advantage 2 will concede the defense runner going for it. DA. Cascades can't turn North Korea because South Korea does the proliferation after the AF. South Korea doesn't proliferate after the AF. Our evidence says that they love the plan and that libs control there now. Japan and Korea prolif cards were not read in the 1 and R. Read through the cards that Kelly read. They didn't read a single card about Japan or Korea proliferation in the link debate. It's tiny. The cross like said it triggers consultation in a crisis. Jesus, I thought they would go for T, but they didn't answer it. That just mandates consultation for escalation before we respond, which means that there's no chance of perceiving an alliance collapse or the broader treaty abrogation that their evidence all talks about. The Snyder evidence, the DIPCAP and Crimea evidence prove that reassurance solved. The 1 and C link evidence says that it solves Korea. Liking the plan isn't key to credibility writ large, which means it's not key to the other impacts, but also Korea definitely likes its demands evidence. I'll do the diplomacy stuff here, not new. Diplomacy is the 1 and C link card on DIPCAP that said that they said, and we read a link defense about U.S. commitments spillover not mattering because people care about domestic conditions. New links justify new link defense, and the block read new ones. None of their evidence describes U.S. actions following a commitment reduction or assumes new diplomacy, but ours assumes the link scenario, which means which is virtually unanswered. Or declining U.S. commitment to South Korea will result in a recommit, which solves the link. A's empirics post Crimea. The U.S. reactionary expansion caused massive military and political and diplomatic deployments to nearby states in Europe and reassured Japan. Aggressive evidence is way more contextual than their link evidence to institutionalized mechanisms, EU economic co-op deployments, and joint military exercise, continue engagement, and fill in for increased fears that result of different operational relevance. The U.S. will clarify that small changes in Korea only apply to Korea because of operational
operational differences and strategically relevant compared to other alliances who need military expansion and to effectively contain Russia and China through the codified offshore balancing foreign policy of Biden. That's that's the 1AR card. All those are reasons why they wouldn't see declining assurances that a prolif impact. No allied prolif escalates. The Mueller evidence cites decades of data to prove alarmism. States make prolif decisions based on like security commitments, money, internal politics, and internal responses. Green and Mueller evidence. One is the allies won't just get the bomb without consultation. None of their evidence explains the situation as it would be an insane gamble. U.S. consultation will always dissuade prolif. They have to A, develop new defense architectures, ISR, command and control, nuclear protection and security, and entire new military funding and strategies, which costing billions of dollars during the COVID pandemic, creating massive new risks to be as the sanctions will turn their economies off overnight. Iran and North Korea prove, and there's no incentive to do that. Sees that they would risk being abandoned by the U.S. All their link evidence that that's their biggest fear and will leave them on an island. In any case, states are risk averse and will develop conventional weapons slowly until they feel they're ready to leave the U.S., which magnifies the time frame for the impact. Two is the adversaries will threaten preemptive strikes, which dissuade their development. And three is that everyone, which they say will happen before, which means that they won't have the incentive to develop or use the weapon. Three is that every one of these reasons that cause massive political costs and domestically which stop proliferation. But even if there is proliferation, it won't cause immediate nuclear war. Miller evidence cites empirics. I'll do more of the impact stuff here. Don't give them all of these countries proliferate. They literally went for everything. None of them get the terminals, and they have we have defense. All of them. One is South Korea wasn't read by the 1AR, but all of the link defense. Link debate disproves it too. Is that Japan wasn't uncarded and it's unanswered by Mueller because they don't care about the NPT. Three is that Turkey has no capability. The ICOV evidence says that it would take years to get the capabilities if they ever wanted it, and that they wouldn't want to because of the NPT. They conceded it. So four is that France mods inevitable because of Turkey alliance fissures, but that doesn't turn the aft because it's conventional. They dropped it. Current case doesn't make sense because they never get to the cascades, and North Korea is already provoking now, which means that we get to it quicker. Also, the app solves it because it deters responses, which means that North Korea will never escalate the thumper stuff. The thumper stuff. The re-highlight was horrible. The Canada thumper was an answer to all their new MTV leaks they've read. The military general went to Canada and said that they wouldn't defend them, which this was a quick shock, and said the U.S. Went and did reassurances, which proved the link defense. If anything, this just proves a quick shocks equals pro. If it's not new, because they read new links in the one another. The link is across like the one you see highlights exactly what the plan does. It initiates a negotiation which solves the mantle. That's all the reassurance arguments. Don't need to reinvent the wheel, but none of their link cards talk about a small process of consultation over crisis management, which Korea loves. And so does the world.
Good debate.
Good debate.
We'll get a card doc together. Afkar Dagescent.
Hey, Cal. Are y'all there?
Yeah.
Wait, can we also get the plan text?
Yeah. I just added it in the Zoom chat.
Perfect. Okay, we're ready. Okay, this was good debate by everybody. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative from Cal. So I sat, I'll start. I think that, the crux of my decision is like, I feel pretty good about the SQUO. I know that allies are assured now. I have some pretty big questions about whether anyone really has an incentive to start a war in North Korea. So I think the neg cards are pretty good, that the alliance and the idea that any conflict means North Korea is going to have to face down the US military sort of dissuades North Korea from taking any of the provocations that you say will escalate. I also thought that neg cards were pretty good, that the alliance moderates South Korea's behavior. So the alliance kind of, South Korea knowing that the US commitment is like really important and something they want to sustain in the future kind of means that they're not going to take the disproportionate measures that your story tells about escalating. I thought that the geography warrant was something the 2AR didn't answer. So all of North Korea's missiles are like pointed right at Seoul, which is a really important strategic place. South Korea, because China is like really close to North Korea, thinks that a war will draw in China, and so that's not something that they want to bother with. I have a suspicion that the other two judges are going to talk a lot about the link to the DA, and so I'm going to, start there. I think that there is tension. In my eyes, there's tension between what the AF is saying when they're describing their advantage scenario and the stuff they're saying about the link to the DA. So my read is that the point of the 1AC is there's stuff that the US and South Korea disagree about with regards to how to respond to North Korea's tactical provocations, right? Like the story of the AF is South Korea is going to blow their lid at a sort of small scale provocation, and then North Korea like responds back. South Korea triggers Article 5. The US is now in a war that they, that started because of a small sort of like naval escalation or whatever. And so it seems intuitive to me that at the very least, the AF does less, right? Like the result of the AF is the US in the negotiation says, in these small scale confrontations, we're not gonna do Article 5, we're not gonna go to a large war. I also was a bit persuaded by the 2NR's frame that like there's some time, and again, yeah, I'm sure this is a little nebulous, but like there's some delay between the plan, which is, all right, we're rewriting the rule book. We're going back to the board. Anything that we haven't agreed about, you can't trigger Article 5 for. And then the resulting consultations that you say result in some sort of consensus building. Like within that time frame, South Korea maybe thinks like, well, maybe the US is going to come in these negotiations. They won't have our back on anything. More importantly, any other allied country might also think, whoa, if the US is rewriting their rules for their alliance with South Korea, maybe they're going to rewrite the rules for alliances with ours. I did think that you got somewhere with some of this reassurance stuff. I thought that the answer to that for me was that argument that I just mentioned, which is there's sort of a, some sort of time frame between the announcement of the plan, which is a like shock to alliance systems, and the ability for reassurances to happen. My read of the 1NC dip cap card was also, I don't think it said reassurance successful. I think it said that reassurance attempted, which I think lessens some of that stuff a little bit. I also thought it's a little new, not in a like, I think it's new in the 1AR, so I throw it out, but like, I think I give it a little bit less weight considering it's a 1NC card that the 2AC doesn't like say something about until the 1AR. So, and I think in those situations, I give the 2NR a little bit more weight when they're explaining against stuff that's a little bit new in the 1AR. I agreed with the AF that there are some questions about like who can and will proliferate. So like the 2NR starting with like they've dropped Japan. That's the one country that we need for the snowball, and then they don't really have a Yes Japan Prolif card is like kind of not great. And the Turkey stuff is like a little bit May. I actually thought that the country that they got the furthest on was France. So like the answer from the AF here is just it'll be conventional modernization, but I thought that the card was pretty good, that it'll be like expanding the nuclear arsenal, and that could be seen as in contravention with global non-prolif norms and sort of snowball. I think that really this was an incredibly close debate, and I ultimately thought that the risk of both the advantage and the DA were kind of low. Like the tiebreaker for me was really this like link turns case stuff, just the idea that we are reassuring South Korea now, our reassurances of South Korea has a moderating effect on South Korea's behavior, made me much more comfortable voting for the SQO than it would in another situation.
Okay, you can hear me, right? All right, yeah, I think the link argument absolutely matters to me in this particular debate, but I think it also matters in the context of how I think the affirmative operates and deals with the disadvantage. I think the thesis of the affirmative from the start of the 1AC is that there's a lot of kind of gray zone areas in which we haven't really sat down and lined up our perception or lined out the possible attack events that could occur. And that kind of inherent problem of the status quo, a lack of cooperation with South Korea and the United States, and having kind of a uniform definition of what a proportional response would look like in the context of any type of conflict, I think begs a lot of uniqueness questions about an inevitability of disagreement in the event of a crisis situation between the United States and South Korea. So even if I look at the vast majority of your defensive cards on case and everything else, I don't think that you 100% take out the event of a crisis event. And by a crisis event, it could be an instance of a Yellow Sea boat sinking and going to the bottom, and a bunch of South Korean soldiers or American soldiers or Navy men dying because of some sort of conflict. This has historically happened. Other types of accidental conflicts. I also think the OPCOM thing, the only real response that I have, honestly, from that, from you all is, OPCOM transition happens like all the time, historically, whatever. So I don't think that you zero out the advantage. I don't think that you zero out the disagreement and the possibility of escalation either happening from the United States or South Korea. That just doesn't happen. The evidence isn't there. And one of the things that I often find confusing in these debates, and honestly somewhat hilarious, is apparently negative defense of rational actors is sufficient to take out the vast majority of the impact. War won't escalate. But then in the context of the disadvantage, apparently some limited time frame of, between the time the plan gets announced and then some sort of negotiation and agreement happens between South Korea, that a nation makes the choice of running up and getting as many nuclear weapons as possible, and largely potentially ending the alliance between South Korea, the United States, or any of our other allies. That type of time frame analysis doesn't really exist in this debate from the negative side of things, and it's quite confusing if I'm also going to evaluate some of the rational actor arguments that I think the affirmative is making based on the framing of the plan is this: we come together, we negotiate, we come to universal agreement on what we think proportionate response is, which means we'll back them, they know when they'll back us, and we have agreement. And I think that the reassurance argument, even in the context of the uniqueness arguments read by the negative, is a warrant for what the affirmative is going for, that it doesn't end the alliance, that we come back together and we work this stuff out. The biggest deal for me is I honestly don't think the 2-R and even the 1-R reads a bunch of evidence about how awful it would be for us to break our alliance commitments. But in the context of the affirmative, you don't have an argument that proves that the reassurance part of the plan, or not the plan, the effect of the plan, wouldn't happen. And I think that there are several scenarios in which you can describe that occurring. I think it's hilarious that a plan text would say we have to come to all of these agreements for possible attacks. The idea of ambiguity being good is that we can't predict all possible conflict scenarios, which means there's always going to be gray zone events, and that eventually the United States, given the fiat of the plan text, couldn't come to the commitment. But you don't describe or even go that far in depth. You hope that I have a fishing expedition where I go in and find some of those warrants in your evidence. And I think that the negative has a higher responsibility to prove their link arguments rather than just hoping that I find it somewhere in the evidence. And it's just not, it's not happening. Okay, so I think the thesis of the affirmative challenges the question on whether or not we have a great relationship with our alliance, that eventually some destabilizing events can occur, whether now or in the future, and that there's always a risk of some escalation. You don't zero out the advantage, but the advantage definitely implicates the disadvantage, both on the uniqueness and the link level. And I think ultimately you don't have much on the question of the consultation process resulting in universal agreement, that solidifies and resolves conflict amongst the alliance. I think that's sufficient to take out a significant, if not a vast majority of the disadvantage. Plus, the last thing that I would say, and I wish that the affirmative would take a little bit more advantage of, I think it's hilarious to read a prolif DA. Prolif is so dangerous, it causes, possible first strike events and things like that. But apparently that doesn't apply to North Korea, who is a proliferating state right now, but they're rational actors, but somehow Turkey or others aren't, that's a distinct environment or situation. So you have to take advantage of reasons why that type of impact would still apply in the context of the peninsula. Applying that, I think, would be helpful. So I'll stop there.
So I agree with some of that. I think what was different for me is I felt that the AF has actually won a substantial risk of the North advantage. I think that the AF's analysis is a lot closer to small provocations causing accidental war, which I think is a lot closer to how the 1AC evidence characterized it. Well, I think a lot of the NIG's North Korea war defense doesn't answer the way the AF's escalation scenario or accidental escalation scenario works. So like the way I interpreted the AF throughout the debate was like, somebody messes up, the stuff Dilo says, like blah, 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 subs, whatever. But like China or North Korea or South Korea could like start the thing that causes the war. Or at least this particular scenario of the North advantage. I thought that was different. I do think that the NIG has won, or their cards are good on, that North Korea would not intentionally escalate due to vulnerability, geography, or MAD, but not that consistent provocations that happen now would not unintentionally cause that same escalation spiral. It results in disproportionate responses from either the US because of Article 5 draw-in, or China or South Korea, or theoretically Russia, which would draw in the US too. All which results in quick nuclear use. I agree that that stuff seems to happen faster than the disad. And that the pre-negotiated responses by South Korea and the US may resolve or mitigate some of that accidental conflict spiraling. The disad, I think the thing that made me differ on with Johnny is that I think that there's not a specific enough link argument to overcome some of the AF's analysis. It seems to me that pre-negotiated response plan would increase alliance credibility, which I don't think is a huge part of the AF's argument, but I think is certainly there. I think the AF's cards about previous tensions in the relationships causing increased reliance are actually pretty good. And I also think that NIG does lack a comparative story with like as to timeframes, like when Turkey, Japan, South Korea, whomever actually prolifs. I think you all have that's like they have the tech where they could do it, but not like when that occurs, or once it occurs, what happens with it. I also think the AF has done a good job extracting the warrant from the Mueller evidence. Sorry, I forgot off the top of my head. That's like once you have or attaining nukes doesn't necessarily take, or takes much longer, even if all the tools are available to you, and that it may become difficult to spiral. I also think that the NIG has an issue with like the escalation from the steps from like once you have the nukes, or like once someone has escalated, how long it takes for the next country to escalate, to once a whole bunch of people now have proliferated or whatever, that actually causes a war, which to me seems to take significantly longer than a risk of the accidental war of the advantage. So to me, I voted just on like, I think the act straight up happens faster or solves a much faster impact than the status quo or the act would theoretically cause. Do you all have questions? I feel like we've all been talking for a while. Otherwise, I got some other random thoughts.
Yeah, my main question was whether we should have taken advantage of the tension that appeared on the flexible response consulting response counter plan, where they're like, the US agreeing to everything South Korea wants is bad, and then use that as a way to implicate the link on the DA.
Yeah, I honestly think that's fine. I think that the truism is that the plan text probably opens up a lot of wounds and forces those wounds to play out in the open. And there's no guarantee of consensus, honestly. And so, if it's true that the U.S. will just go along with what South Korea wants, that sounds pretty dangerous. But the opposite could also be true, where they come to unmanageable disagreements about something. Like the Michigan State affirmative about how the United States wants South Korea to interpret their Article 3 as being well beyond the peninsula. Like, why through the process of consultation wouldn't we try to push that and South Korea says no? How does that work? So I think the honest truth is, and it doesn't necessarily require evidence, honestly, is just, let's say at the top of the 1NR, or even the 2NR, I don't think is too late, is just describing how it immediately separates and causes a major gash in our relationship and likely bleeds out rather than resulting in consensus.
Michigan, do you have any more questions? I know the next round's coming soon, but I just wanted to ask Johnny a quick question. What do you think the 2AR needs to get your ballot? And like, what would be the biggest revision and like time change you'd have?
Yeah, so for me, I think it is, and part of this involves stuff happening earlier in the debate, but a clear description of what exactly happens after the plan, right? Like the words that I wrote down in the 2AR were, the plan's really tiny. It just mandates consultation, which doesn't collapse the alliance. And I think I need like a little bit more of like, there's, it forces a negotiation process that inevitably results in consensus, like, and just sort of like draw out these 1AC cards explaining the process through which the negotiation happens, say that it happens really, really quickly. And like the same thing with the reassurance stuff. It's like that debate becomes like a little bit tagliney in the 1AR, but I can easily imagine a 2AR that just sits there and is like, we'd recommit, a bunch of troops to South Korea. And if Japan gets really mad through, and they tell us that through our diplomatic channels, we'll send a bunch of troops there, or, we'll send a bunch of State Department officials over there to talk about, how we're going to recommit our stuff. Just like, what does reassurance look like and what does renegotiation look like? And if those were sort of like paragraph style debating in the 2AR, I think I would also be there.
Definitely. Well, thank you all and good luck, Michigan.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for judging. Good debate.
Good debate.